Okay, so this is finding credible sources online. Um, First of all, I want to say I hope that you guys are all doing well. Um, I hope you are not too overwhelmed with the online learning experience. I know it's new for you, it's new for all of us, and we're all doing the best we can. Um, I hope we're making it work. But I'm glad that you're here. And again, I hope you're all healthy and safe. So let's get started. So during this lecture, what we're going to do, first, we're going to review what credible sources are and why they are important for research writing. Then we're going to get into reviewing some simple guidelines for evaluating sources. And then finally, the last major piece, which I think will probably be the most helpful for you guys, I'm going to do a walkthrough of how you would go about finding sources through the CSI library and Google Scholar. Those are your two go-to online directories or search engines for finding credible sources. And then finally, I'm going to end it with a Q&A. If anyone has any questions, I'll take those questions at the end. Um, if throughout the lecture you have a question for me, you can utilize the raise hand button. I don't know how many of you guys have used Zoom before, how familiar you are, but I believe if you go to the participants button at the bottom and you click, I think it'll say more options or something like that. You will see it's kind of different depending on what kind of device you're on, but it's in the participant section. For some people, it's under the more button. You'll see a little button that says raise hand. And when you click that, I will see a little blue hand pop up next to your name, which means you have a question and you'd like to contribute. And at that point, you can unmute your mic and you can ask your question. We're all muted for now, just to keep things um, running smoothly without any interference in the background. All right. If you like, or if you would like, you can use the chat option and you can write out a message for me in the chat box, a question or a comment or whatever, and I'll get to that as well. Um, Keep in mind that I've reserved the last few minutes for questions and answers. All right. So if it's not totally pressing, there will be time at the end. So you may want to just like hang on to your question. But I do encourage you to ask questions because if you have a question, everyone else probably has the same question, right? Okay. So let's get started with the basics. So what is a credible source? All right. So in general, a credible source is one that is accurate, one that is free from bias, and one that is from a reputable publication. Okay. So you're looking for those three key things. Is it accurate? Is it biased? And where was it published? Was it a reputable publication or not? Okay. So that's pretty simple to start with. Those are the basics. Now, let's go through some simple guidelines for evaluating sources. So, when you're writing your research papers for this class and the classes that you will take further on down the road in your college career, these are some good rules of thumb to keep handy for evaluating sources. So, what kind of sources can be considered credible? A few things. First of all, sources should be current. So, materials published within the last 10 years are what you want to be using primarily, if not completely. Okay. Um, Academia lives on, right? So, more research is done every year, um, given on any given topic. So you want to make sure that you are finding sources that are not outdated. You're not finding studies or hypotheses or papers that have been disproven or debunked. You want to make sure that you're using sources that are relevant still. So if you are, let's say, writing your paper about American marriage as an institution, and you find a source about American marriage from 1952, well, I can guarantee you that whoever wrote that back in 1952 is probably going to have a very different sort of interpretation of what marriage is, what it looks like, and how it functions in society than someone who's written within the last 10 years. Now, you can cite from that source if you acknowledge that what you're citing is outdated and it serves a purpose in your paper, but you're not going to want to cite something that's super old as support for a current argument. Okay. So that's first of all, make sure your stuff is current. Your research articles should be written by respected and well-known authors. So not just any guy or gal with a blog. Okay. So they should have some sort of credentials. They should be experienced in their respective fields. Okay. Okay, moving on. Websites that are registered by government and educational institutions are best, always. So .gov and .edu sites are most preferable, okay? Academic databases, i.e. Academic Search Premier or Academic Search Complete or JSTOR, those are great resources. Those are the best. That's the gold standard. If the article that you want to use has been published and is searchable and findable in one of these academic or on one of these academic databases, then chances are that it's a credible source that will be worthwhile for you to read. Additionally, materials from Google Scholar, not google.com, specifically Google Scholar, which I'll walk you through in a couple minutes as well. So what sources should be avoided? All right, so out-of-date materials, as we spoke about earlier. If it was published over 10 years ago, you want to be pretty skeptical about how relevant it is, okay? Unless, as I said earlier, you are using it to support a point, to show that it is outdated, or to illustrate the change in opinion over the years. But you're not going to want to rely on it as a relevant current source. You should avoid posts from social networks like Facebook and Twitter unless it is relevant to your thesis. I'm sorry, I'm just looking at the chat and there's a question said no websites but Google Scholars. Yeah, you can use websites and Google Scholars. Google Scholar is good. It's a good place to search for good websites, credible websites. So I'm not saying that you cannot use websites. I'm saying they have to be credible websites, credible sources. So chances are if you use regular Google, like the main google.com, you're going to find a lot of stuff based on the keywords that you type in, and almost none of it will be credible. But Google Scholar, on the other hand, basically what it does is it just filters through all the Google hits and filters out all those credible sources, the academic sources, the ones that have been either peer reviewed or from reputable sources, from experts in the field, etc. Okay. All right, so getting back to what I was talking about earlier, posts from social networks. So you should avoid those unless, let's say you're writing about social media and that's the topic of your paper. Well, then obviously you can use some posts from social networks to support your points. In general, you're going to want to avoid them especially since we don't really know who's behind every Twitter handle that's out there. Even if you take a look at our president, right now he uses Twitter a lot, but we don't have any guarantee that that's always him tweeting, right? It could be an assistant, it could be an intern, we want to make sure that we're avoiding that as much as possible. Specifically for Trump, if you want to talk about him, since he is the Twitter president and he arguably used Twitter to get himself elected, um, that's a different story. And you, while it's best to stick to what he said on the record in reputable publications and in interviews, I would say for him, you probably can use his Twitter because he's the exception to the rule. He's used Twitter to announce all sorts of policies before he's even addressed the public through other means. So that's the word on Twitter. In general, avoid, but obviously there are some exceptions. Okay. Just looking at the chat. If you can't stay for the whole thing, that's fine. Stay for as long as you can. All right. Do not use blogs as sources, okay? They're not peer-reviewed. They're not reputable. We just want to ignore them. Personal blogs, there are millions of them, and they're not nearly all written by actual experts in any field. So we want to avoid those. We want to avoid research articles that don't have their own citations. So if you're reading an article that's well researched itself, it will reference or cite other sources. And if it doesn't, that should raise a red flag. And in general, we want to avoid websites that end in .com, .org, or .net. However, there are some exceptions to this rule, especially with .org. There are lots of organizations that are reputable, and you can quote from their material with the understanding that obviously an organization is going to be a bit biased. .com websites are usually commercial, so that's what the com stands for. So they are tied to buying and selling of goods and services. So we want to avoid .com websites in general, although, as I said earlier, there are exceptions to that as well. So you just got to kind of use a little bit of common sense. You got to look through the material and see if it appears reputable before going ahead and using it. I also want to make a point to say that any kind of like homework helper website, any kind of website that's devoted to, we can help you write a good essay, or here are some essays that have been written by students on the topic, none of those are allowed. So just because it's written and you found it online does not mean it's a credible source. So anything like 123 help me or writemyessay.com or any of these other sources, use some common sense. Obviously, I don't want you to be taking from other students. I want you to be taking from reputable, respected authors, okay? So if you are quoting from some student's Prezi that he gave in an intro to philosophy class 5 years ago, that's not a credible source, okay? So that's just a side note. All right, so let's move on. A few more guidelines. How do I know if a source is reliable or not? So always ask yourself the following questions in order to determine if a source is credible or not. Who is the author? Reliable sources are always well written by well-known and respected authors. These sources are always properly and accurately referenced. Therefore, when checking the source's credibility, you can find more information for your own research. Okay, number 2, when was the material published? Generally, books published in the 1990s contain outdated information. Hence, you're expected to use materials published not later than 10 years ago. What is the purpose of a source? Always try to evaluate if the source presents clear and unbiased information or if its aim is to alter and persuade one's views. A source written from a specific point of view may still be credible, but it can limit the coverage of a topic to a particular side of a debate. So that goes back to what I said earlier about those .org websites. Many of those organizations have literature on them, or letters on them that are okay to take from and to use as support, but you have to acknowledge that if it's coming from an organization that is advocating for itself, then it is probably going to be biased. And you want to make sure that you are presenting a well-rounded view of the issue that the organization has written about. Okay, so how is this source proved? Try to avoid sources that don't have references or evidence to prove its point of view. Always make sure if the source provides support to give to the given claims. Okay, and what type of audience is this source aimed at? Always take into account what type of sources your audience will value. For example, as credible sources, if you're writing for an academic audience, they will definitely prefer peer-reviewed journals and scholarly papers. Okay, so without further ado, let's get to the walkthrough of first the CSI library database, which is probably the first place you should go to for credible sources, and then secondly, Google Scholar. All right. So give me 1 second. I'm just going to change my screen. Okay. All right, so I'm currently on Blackboard. Okay, so you guys are seeing what Blackboard looks like from my end. So it's gonna look a little bit different than it does on your home screen, but generally everything is pretty much the same layout. So if I go over to the left over here, um, I'm going to see some really helpful tabs. Um, hang on 1 second. I'm sorry. Let me just. Okay. I think you should see my mouse more clearly now. So announcements are here, online learning documents are here, assignments here, textbook info, virtual coffee house, CSI library. This is where we're going to go. There's also some helpful videos here and the online writing lab, which is an invaluable resource for all things MLA and research writing. So let's go to the CSI library. So it's going to bring me to a new page. All right, so you, as CSI students, all have access to this library from home. So you do not need to leave your house. I'm not asking you to leave your house during this time. In fact, I'm encouraging you to stay home. But the good news is, thanks to technology, you can find everything that the library has to offer from home. The only thing you will need is your CSI CIX login and perhaps your ID, your EMPL ID number. All right, so if you look here, there's books and articles, databases, journals, research guides, frequently asked questions. So this is super user-friendly and super easy to use. So let's say I'm doing the COVID paper. I'm gonna start with searching for books and articles on COVID. So I'm gonna just type in COVID. COVID-19. So that's my keyword, okay? All right, let's do a search. Okay, so this is OneSearch, which is a great tool. Okay, all right, so it says sign in to get additional results and to see request options. So let me sign in. You will need to do, yeah, see, this is the library, the login. Okay. All right, so that's what you're gonna do. You're gonna sign in there. Okay, let me go back to that other screen. Okay, so if you look right here, we have COVID-19. You see this little symbol right here, says that it's peer reviewed. That's great. The full text is available. You could click it and you'll go right to it. Okay, so let's see what this source is. Okay, now we have a ton of articles here from this journal. And we can scroll through them. They look like they're not all related to COVID, but if I scroll through them, I could find COVID articles here. Okay, let's go back. Let's see what else we have available here. This is the bar exam and COVID-19 pandemic, the need for immediate action. Okay, full text available. You'll see lots of tabs opening. Okay, so here is a cover page for a typical research article. So look at the authors here. These are credible authors. You have a law professor, you have multiple law professors from multiple law schools. It's published within the last 10 years. It begins down here. It's got lots of sources itself on the bottom, which we talked about earlier. So it references other documents, which is a sign of an academic text. And this looks like it's all about COVID-19's effect on the profession of law and those who are entering the profession. Okay, so that's one. Let me close this out. Let me close this out. Okay, so if I want to filter my results, I can also go over here to the right and sort them. So I could sort them by relevance, by newest, oldest, author, title. I could click include items without full text, but I don't think we're going to want to do that. I could also go down to resource type. So let's say I just want articles. So now I've clicked that. Now I've narrowed my research to just articles. Okay, let's see. Look at all these articles about COVID. And they're all peer reviewed from peer reviewed journals. These are all excellent sources. Let's take a look at this one. COVID-19 needs a Manhattan Project, full text available. Okay, so I'm gonna sign in here. I have various sign-ins. Oops. Okay. So now we've come to sciencemag.org, and this is fine. This is a very credible source. Yes, it's a .org, but we found it through the CSI Library Archive, and it is peer reviewed, so we can use anything from here. And if you look, this is super helpful. It says, click here for free access to our latest coronavirus / COVID-19 research commentary news. So if I click that link, this looks like it's going to be incredibly helpful. Wow, look at all these articles. Research and commentary. And these are, God, this was published yesterday. So this is great if you're doing the COVID project. Look at all of these sources here. It takes a little bit of clicking around and playing around, but the library website, as you can see, is really helpful. And you can find a lot. Wow, there's a lot here. Okay, so that's great. All right, so let's say we want to do not COVID. Let's say we want to search for articles on marriage in America. So, marriage America. We're going to pare it down to just keywords and we'll see what we get. Okay, so this article is interesting. It is not peer reviewed. It's by an anonymous source. So I'm kind of wary about it, but let's see. Yeah, and it's not available. So sometimes you'll hit a dead end, and that's part of the process. Let's narrow it down to just articles. We could also just make it from peer reviewed journals. Okay, now we hit the jackpot. So look at this. The first thing that popped up, changing same-sex marriage attitudes in America from 1988 through 2010. So this is a great resource for those of you who want to present hypothetically some background to your topic about American marriage, if that were your chosen area. Um, let's see, what else? This is from 2015. What Another Female Husband, the prehistory of same-sex marriage in America, the suffocation model, why marriage in America is becoming an all or nothing institution, um, peer reviewed, academic source, full text available. This is all great stuff. If you look over to the right here, there's also topic and subject. You can filter using some of these. The more you filter your results, the fewer results you will get, which is good because then you will be less overwhelmed. So let's say you want to talk about economics. Okay, so now we're down to, if you look here, we have 9,408 results, which is much fewer than we started with. And some of these are not going to be helpful for us. So if you look here, just based on the keywords, we have China and Latin America, a marriage made in heaven. That's not about marriage, the institution. That's about the relationship between China and Latin America. So that's not for us. Pathways to marriage and cohabitation in Central America. That's not for us, right? Because we are writing about the United States of America. Okay, Latin America, not for us. Okay, here's something that's probably for us. Oh, except it's from 1985. So we can cite it and we can use it in our research, absolutely, but we cannot cite it as a relevant current source. So let's go down and scroll and see what else we got here. We have a lot of Latin America. We want to look for the US proper. So let's change our keyword up here. Marriage USA. Okay. Let's stick to peer reviewed journals. Let's limit to only full text articles, like articles that we can find the full text of. Okay. Okay. So these are more up our alley. Looks like some cultural comparisons between the USA and other nations. So there's a USA Canada comparison, qualitative study of Chinese immigrant Christian marriage in the USA, theories of same-sex marriage in the USA and South Africa. Okay, so as we can see, it takes some digging, but that's why it's research, right? It's going to take some digging, it's going to take some time, but there's lots available for you as long as you are persistent and you continue to narrow down your search results. All right. So that's the library um, offered to you, available to you through CSI, and this is a great resource. So that's that. Let's talk about Google Scholar. So I'm going to close these out. All right, so Google Scholar is going to work the same way. So let's say COVID. I just did a search for COVID. Severe outcomes among patients with coronavirus disease 2019. Okay, so this is current. It is from a .com website, so we're going to check it out to make sure it looks legitimate. It does look legitimate because it is from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and it's got lots of stats. It's from a U.S. Department of Health and Human Services publication, which means it's really it's from a government. It's government sanctioned. We have lots of tables, discussion, charts, graphs. That means there's going to be references, which there are right here. Okay, so this is a good source. So Google Scholar kind of works much the same as the library. You just search through what you get based on the keywords or what hits come up, and then you use your kind of common sense to figure out what is credible and what isn't, knowing that if it's been filtered to Google Scholar, it's probably credible. COVID-19 in the cardiovascular system. Yeah, these are all good sources. Let's do the same thing for American Marriage. Okay, the deinstitutionalization of American marriage from an EDU. That's pretty good. Power politics in the American marriage. That's kind of old, but we could, as I said, still use it with an asterisk next to it. This is a historical resource. It's a .gov. That's definitely good. That would probably be good in your intro section, just to establish what American marriage looked like in the early 21st century, if that was your topic. All right, so I think what I'm going to do is kick it over to you guys and see what kind of questions you have for me that I can answer, and then we'll wrap up. So if anybody has a question, just raise your hand or type one in the chat and I will answer it. I'm sorry if this sounds kind of awkward or like I'm pausing too much, but that's just because I'm not used to teaching alone in a room talking to my computer. Okay, so I see a raised hand. I don't see the name, it just says iPhone 5. So you can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hey, Professor, it's Joe. Just want to ask you a question based on one I used in chat. So
okay.
Can we only use sources based on the CSO website and Google Scholars?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that you could also use print sources, but at this point in time, I don't want you going to the library.
Okay, thank you.
So yeah.
All right.
Hey, any other?
Oh,
go
sorry
ahead.
to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
I want to ask. So that's it. Just we have to wait until we leave.
I'm sorry.
Never mind. Just I thought like this is the last thing.
Yeah, it is. So I'm just taking any questions.
Okay.
So if anybody else
Thank you.
hasn't, yeah, no problem. Anyone else have a question for me? Okay, so I guess there are no questions. I hope that this was helpful. And I really thank you guys for participating. And I will post the recording of this video to the Blackboard. Okay. So hold on. Oops, sorry. Thanks, Professor. Thank you. All right, guys. You guys can head out. Thank you so much.